How did the Battle of Durbe 1260 become the engagement that threatened to extinguish the German presence in the Baltic? The Teutonic Order moves through ancient forests, their iron advancement meeting a resistance that refuses to be bartered like chattel. In July, heat weighs on the mail of the brothers as they march into Samogitia. Master Burkhard von Hornhausen leads the host toward a destiny that will shatter the dream of a contiguous Crusader state. This day of carnage serves as the catalyst for the collapse of Teutonic authority. Why was the rugged lowland of Samogitia called the strategic wedge by the Crusader High Command? This territory physically separates the Livonian brothers in the north from the Prussian knights expanding from the south. Without control of this corridor, the order remains bifurcated, forced to rely on treacherous sea routes or the tenuous cooperation of local tribes to move supplies. The goal is a permanent land bridge to unify the administration of the north. That geographic divide forces the Crusaders into a grinding campaign of fortification that eventually leads to tactical overreach. How did the coronation of King Mindaugas in 1253 set the stage for total war? To secure his throne and papal recognition, the Lithuanian monarch cedes vast Samogitian territories to the Livonian order in a massive diplomatic maneuver. This stabilizes the king's power, but is viewed by the tribal elders as a profound act of betrayal. They reject the foreign taxes and the destruction of their sacred groves, choosing instead to organize a decentralized guerrilla resistance. That royal transfer turns the local populations into a unified force of fanatical defenders. What happens when the two-year truce between the knights and the tribes finally expires in 1259? The Samogitians, moving away from fragmented raids, consolidate their leadership under the war genius Alminas. They prepare for a winter campaign, stockpiling supplies and honing their light infantry tactics to counter the heavy cavalry of the West. Tribal festivals and rousing speeches incite a religious fervor focused on purging the Crusader presence from the forest. This internal mobilization shifts the conflict from localized skirmishes into a struggle for regional survival. Why did the construction of Jorgenburg represent a new architecture of occupation in the deep wilderness? Master Burkhard von Hornhausen places this stone spike in Karsuva, intending to control the vital river corridor between the two fronts. The fortification is a technological leap designed to radiate Teutonic power and suppress the surrounding pagan communities with permanent garrison strength. It stands as a masonry challenge to the forest tribes who have only known wood and earth. That stone presence forces the Samogitians to innovate a tactical counter to the castle's strength. How do the Samogitians respond to the threat of the stone fortress at Jorgenburg? Rather than attempting a suicidal assault on the masonry walls, they build a wooden anti-castle in immediate proximity to the Crusader outpost. This tactical innovation allows them to place the garrison under a permanent state of siege, cutting off every forager and supply wagon from Memel. The surrounding landscape becomes a no-man's land where no knight can ride safely. By the summer of 1260, the starving garrison faces total collapse, forcing the order into a desperate relief effort. What kind of host does Burkhard von Hornhausen assemble to save the dying garrison? A papal bull from Alexander IV calls for a massive crusade, drawing manpower from across the Holy Roman Empire to protect the cross. The force that gathers at Memel Castle includes 150 white-mantled knight brothers and several thousand secular crusaders. They are augmented by native auxiliaries, including Curonians and Estonians, who provide the army's essential light infantry and scouting capacity. This pan-European coalition represents the peak of 13th century military power, yet it remains fundamentally fractured by internal pride. Why do Danish knights from Estonia join the march with such rigid expectations of victory? These secular crusaders bring heavy horses and a firm belief in the superiority of Western chivalric combat over tribal skirmishing. They refuse to adapt to the rugged wilderness, viewing the Baltic tribes as a lesser force to be swept away in a single charge. Their presence increases the host's weight, but also its tactical inflexibility on the shifting terrain of the marshes. That reliance on heavy armor creates a false sense of security that blinds the commanders to the environmental traps ahead. Where does the Samogitian leader Alminas strike to disrupt the Crusader advance? He executes a brilliant diversionary raid deep into Courland, bypassing the main frontier and threatening the lands of the Order's own subjects. This maneuver presents Burkhard with a psychological dilemma. He must choose between the starving knights at Jorgenberg and the protection of his tax-paying levies. Overconfident in his numbers, the master turns his great host away from the relief mission to pursue the raiders. That pursuit pulls the Crusader army exactly where the Samogitians want them to fight. How does the geography of the Durbe River become a tactical cage for the knights? The Samogitians retreat toward a field by the river, a location dominated by heavy clay and deep peat bogs. The summer heat has not dried the wetlands, leaving the ground soft and treacherous for heavy destrier horses. Alminas knows the terrain favors his light Baltic ponies and foot soldiers over the iron-clad men-at-arms. By choosing this specific site, the Samogitians negate the shock power of the Crusader line. That choice of ground ensures that the coming melee will be fought on tribal terms. What happens during the final war council held in the shadow of the Courland hills? The Curonian auxiliaries plead for the return of their women and children taken captive during the Samogitian raid once the victory is won. They ask that their families be treated as free subjects rather than as war booty to be divided among the Crusaders. The German leadership, blinded by legalistic rigidity and the greed of foreign mercenaries, rejects the request. This refusal tells the Curonians that their families are less valuable than the profit of the campaign. Why does the rejection of the Curonian plea destroy the coalition's morale before the fight? Resentment boils within the auxiliary ranks as the soldiers realize they are fighting for masters who view them as second-class subjects. The Curonians, who provide the army's scouting and light support, begin to eye the Samogitian lines with a new understanding. They share a culture and a language with the enemy that their German overlords will never comprehend. That growing alienation creates a fifth column within the heart of the host. This moral friction is a silent disaster waiting for the first spark of battle. How does the swampy ground near Dunalka change the physics of the engagement for the heavy cavalry? The destriers, carrying knights in chainmail hauberks and great helms, begin to founder as they enter the field by the river. Each step in the soft clay drains the energy of the horses and breaks the cohesion of the phalanx-style charge. The knights find themselves immobilized in the mire, their heavy armor transforming from protection into a liability. That loss of mobility turns the elite heavy cavalry into static targets for the hidden forest warriors. The environmental trap is now fully sprung on the Crusader vanguard. Why do the Danish knights ignore the warnings to dismount despite the soft ground? Their adherence to chivalric pride prevents them from fighting on foot, even as they see the horses struggling in the mud. They believe the sheer weight of their charge will overcome any terrain, a cognitive bias that proves fatal in the marshes of Courland. The German leadership fails to enforce a tactical change, allowing the host to remain split between mounted and unmounted units. That refusal to adapt breaks the army's unity before the first spear is even thrown. This arrogance of chivalry leads them directly into the Samogitian kill zone. What happens when the Battle of Durbe 1260 finally commences with a thunderous charge? The knights commit to the mud, the wet thud of thousands of hooves filling the air as they struggle toward the Samogitian line. The tribal warriors do not meet them head-on, instead utilizing the war of the javelin to disrupt the advancing formation. Waves of light-throwing spears rain down on the unarmored faces of the horses, causing panic and chaos in the front ranks. That initial volley halts the momentum of the charge and forces the Crusaders into a desperate scramble for footing. How does the high volume of missile fire neutralize the armored knights in the bog? The Samogitians target the horses specifically, knowing that an unhorsed knight is easily dispatched in the deep mud. Each javelin carries enough kinetic energy to pierce light shields and soft flesh, turning the field into a slaughterhouse of animals. The knights, trapped in 30 kilograms of steel and mail, are unable to reach their tormentors who move with high mobility across the peat. That missile attrition thins the Crusader ranks and shatters the morale of the secular mercenaries. The weight of the iron becomes a tomb for the invaders. Where does the critical blow to the Crusader line originate during the height of the melee? The Curonian auxiliaries, seeing the knights struggling in the mire, turn their shields and attack the order from the rear. This betrayal sandwiches the elite heavy cavalry between their own rebellious allies and the Samogitian front. The Estonians and other native levies, seeing the treachery, flee the field in a mass panic that leaves the brothers alone. That sudden reversal of loyalty destroys the army's cohesion and turns the battle into a desperate last stand. The knights are now surrounded by thousands of vengeful warriors. How does the massacre of the 150 White Cloaks unfold as the sun begins to set? The brothers of the Teutonic Order fight with the desperation of men who know no mercy or ransom is coming. Burkhard von Hornhausen and Heinrich Botel are cut down in the first hour of the collapse, leaving the host without any central command. The Samogitians use hand axes and knives to find the gaps in the chainmail, finishing the work started by the swamps. That total decimation of the leadership leaves a strategic vacuum across the Baltic provinces. The field is left stained with the blood of the crusading elite. Why does the news of the defeat at Durbe trigger a chain reaction of rebellion? The myth of Teutonic invincibility is shattered, proving that even a pan-European coalition can be destroyed in the field by tribal resistance. From Semigalia to the Vistula, the Baltic tribes realize the order is vulnerable and rise in coordinated revolt. The strategic land bridge through Samogitia is lost, and the two branches of the order are once again physically isolated. That sudden collapse of authority forces the Crusaders onto the defensive for a generation. The dream of a unified Teutonic state evaporates in a single afternoon of violence. How does the Great Prussian Uprising nearly extinguish the remaining German presence in the Baltic? Led by the educated noble Hircus Monte, the rebels used their knowledge of siegecraft to reduce the Order's control to just 5 coastal castles. For over a decade, the Teutonic state exists only as a collection of fortified islands in a pagan sea. King Mindaugas renounces his crown and his faith, returning Lithuania to a pagan Grand Duchy that will challenge Christendom for centuries. That deeper struggle with the papacy, the rise of Bologna's scholars, and the legends of Alberto de Giussano will be the subject of another episode. Which next episode should we explore? The Battle of Durbe 1260 proved that stone and iron could be broken by the resilience of a people defending their sacred forests. If this investigation into the collapse of the Teutonic dream helped you understand the Northern Crusades, scan the QR code on screen to subscribe and continue the series. Thank you for watching.